Let's one more time. Hi, everybody. We are having some tech updates done right now, and I'm hoping that we can stave things off till 9 p.m. Wish me luck, because tech is not my thing, and tech support puppy is nowhere to be found tonight. So anyway, we've got lots of cool nature happenings, and I want to share them with you. So let's get our slideshow loaded in here and get this show on the road. Enough of that. If you had a chance to read last week's column, and I know at least a few of you did, the topic was the 13-line ground squirrel, and the setup for it was a young man who had visited Hickory Knolls with, what I'm assuming were his maybe grandparents, older relatives, and they were looking out the windows by our bird feeders, and they kept telling little Henry, or whatever his name was, look at the chipmunk, look at the chipmunk. And he kept saying, it's not a chipmunk. And little Henry was right. It was not a chipmunk. It was a 13-line ground squirrel, Ictidomus tridecimlineatus. I'll get back to that name in a couple of slides, but yeah, we tend to take these creatures, we lump chipmunks and ground squirrels together, but they're actually very different, not only in the way they look, but in the way they act and the places that they live. So here we have a side-by-side comparison. We've got our ground squirrel on the right, we've got our eastern chippy here on the left. And you can see that the markings are pretty different. And if we wanted to, we could count 13 lines on the back of that ground squirrel. Some of them are dotted and some of them are solid, but there's 13 of them all together. And so that's, one big difference is just in the way the markings are distributed. Two, the ground squirrel is larger than the chipmunk. And three, the ground squirrel prefers former prairies, grassland areas, gardens. Those of you who have plots at our community garden plots are well acquainted with the 13-line ground squirrel. The chipmunk, on the other hand, prefers a more wooded or woodland habitat. We have a lot of chipmunks in our local neighborhoods. There's a few areas that have 13-line ground squirrels as their main burrowing rodent, but those tend to be out west of here, west of town, places that perhaps were former prairie. Now, let's get back to that scientific name. So for years, the ground squirrels were lumped into a very large genus called Spermophilus. And sperm means seed and philus means loving, so seed-loving little creatures. Well, genetic testing, our access to DNA these days, it's allowed scientists and taxonomists to drill down even farther and identify different characteristics. As it turns out, a lot of our North American ground squirrels, I believe including the prairie dog, have now been moved over to a different genus called Ictidomus, which it's two Greek words that mean a mousy, weaselly looking thing. And when I saw that, I immediately thought of the video we watched, I think it was just last week, this little creature moving around. Remember the gentleman had sent this video in and wanted to know what was wrong with the chipmunk in his daughter's yard. So we determined it wasn't a chipmunk. It did kind of wonder if maybe it was a 13-line ground squirrel, but as it turns out, it most likely is a least weasel. But when we look at how it moves, I love this individual clearly had some issues, kind of wondering if maybe it got scooped up by a predator, which it then proceeded to bite, which then made the predator drop it. on its head. Still don't know for sure the story of the spinning creature there, but it is a weasel, and it does superficially resemble the 13-line ground squirrel, also known as the weaselly mouse. Now, the weasel still circling there in the middle. You can see there's no markings on its back, but the 13-line ground squirrel, it does have 13 lines, and it is quite active in the grassland areas that we have, including the Hickory Knolls natural area. So they are extensive burrowers, as ground squirrels tend to be. And I know some people aren't real fond of that burrowing tendency because it can cause problems, especially if it's near, say, sidewalks or pavers, things that might be inclined to sink or get lopsided when the ground falls out from underneath them. But when they're in their natural habitat, there is really so many benefits to what they do to the soil. They're one of the few animals that can truly excavate. And you think of, when you see a hole in the ground, what's your immediate reaction? I know I hear this all the time, kids and grown-ups alike. They see a hole in the ground and they think, oh, it's a snake hole. But when you think about snakes and you think about the types of soil we have, at least in this area, it's not really possible for, say, our garter snakes and our fox snakes and our milk snakes to create a burrow, a hiding place, a place to spend the winter. So thanks to tunneling creatures like 13-line ground squirrels, those animals are able to survive the winter. They wouldn't be able to do it on their own. So hats off to you, little ground squirrel. Keep your eyes open for them. Again, if you're out at Hickory Knolls, look around the building. We do have chipmunks too that toddle over from the savanna, but we have a goodly number of 13-line ground squirrels. You'll also see the ground squirrels exclusively over in the garden plots. I've often had gardeners tell me that they'll be planting their rows in the springtime, they'll be putting in their beans, or maybe they're planting corn. And as they're going along, maybe 10, 20 feet behind them comes the ground squirrel. And just as those seeds go in the ground squirrel is vacuuming them up, shoving them into its cheek pouches, living up to that old name of Spermophilus, the seed lover. One other quick note on these guys, I wish I had a picture of it, but the ground squirrels at the Hickory Knolls community garden plots, they do have some natural predators. The red-tailed hawks will sometimes try to fly in, but they oftentimes, well, from say March through maybe September, October, they get chased off by the red-winged blackbirds. An animal that's not as prone to getting chased off and who actually does a pretty good job catching these ground squirrels is the great blue heron. Next door to Hickory Knolls at the St. Charles School for Boys, now known as the Illinois Youth Corrections Facility, there's a small heron rookery, and those herons will come over and feed on the ground squirrels that they can find there in the garden plots. So just kind of a cool thing, something that's sort of evolved over the last few years. The herons have found they don't have to go to water every time. They can grab a snack at the garden plots, just like their friends, the ground squirrels, do. Anyway, let's move on. This is a story that comes to us from Sugar Grove, where my friend Teresa lives. They have a nice wooded lot, and part of that lot had some pretty good sized basswood trees. Now, if you know basswood, you know they tend to grow in bunches, multiple stems emanating from a single center. And that wood is a little bit soft, and it is sometimes prone to splitting, or in this case, crashing down completely. When we had those storms, remember when the tornadoes hit down in Naperville and Woodridge in that area? Well, this tree took a hit too, and it came down. Oh, rats, down came the tree. But what we should have been thinking was, oh, rats. Because inside this tree, well, probably hanging up on one of the upper branches, was a family of red bats. Before the tree cleanup started, Teresa was out kind of inspecting things, and she came across these two little creatures there on the ground. These are eastern red bats, and they didn't even have their eyes open yet. And so she contacted me to see, what could be done? How do we save the bats? Well, the thing is, in Illinois, bats are one of two creatures that cannot be rehabilitated, striped skunks being the other one. We'll get back to that in a minute. But I wanted to show you just a little bit more about the species. These are the guys that hang up in the trees, and they will sometimes even hang by just 1 foot in the daytime. And they let the breezes sway them back and forth. So they look an awful lot like a dead leaf hanging from a tree. In fact, this is on my bucket list to one day find a red bat hanging from a tree in the daytime. Every time I see a clump of dead leaves, I look and I hold my breath and I cross my fingers. It hasn't happened yet. I'm sure it will someday. But these are not bats that would live in a bat house. They would not live in our attics or behind our shutters. These are part of the group of bats that we call the tree bats. Another example of this sort of bat in our area would be the hoary bat. The hoary bat and the eastern red bat, they're both pretty chunky, they're pretty well furred, they're pretty cold tolerant. Sometimes we'll see them flying, looking for insects on days that are pretty chilly. And they migrate a little bit, not too far downstate, and they can sometimes be found overwintering in hollow trees. Well, they're also, red bats are the species in Illinois that has the highest potential reproductive rate. Bats generally give birth to 1 or 2 pups a year. Red bats can have up to 4. Now, there's no telling how many pups the red bat in Teresa's tree had. She found 2. There may have been 2 others. When they're as small as those, when their eyes are still closed, they tend to cling on to mom. Now, she probably made a getaway as soon as that tree started to drop. And those 2 youngsters were left behind. I'm sad to say there wasn't really a lot that could be done for them legally. Like I said, it's not illegal. It's not allowed. Wildlife rehabilitators could lose their license for trying to help a bat or a striped skunk. This is according to the Illinois Wildlife Code. It's worded kind of tricky though, isn't it? Bats may not be shot, trapped, transported, or held in confinement, except when a bat is found in an area where they may have contact with humans or domestic pets. That except part is so that the bat can be held and turned in for testing for rabies. I would say, oh gosh, it was back when I started in this field, so maybe 20 years ago, the commonly cited figure was the wild bat population in Illinois had a rabies rate of 1 to 2%. Well, now the figure has gone up a little bit to 5%. And I got curious to see, because this is the time of year when we start hearing about rabies cases. Illinois Department of Public Health, now they've had their hands full for the last year with pandemics, but they do still track the numbers of bats that are turned in and tested for rabies. By the way, when a bat is captured and it's turned in to be tested for rabies, it doesn't get let go again. That's a test that the bat has to be euthanized in order to examine and look for the traces of the rabies virus. So here's where we stand. This was actually just a few days ago. They updated this map. We've had 2 rabid bats here in Kane County. There's been 2 in DuPage. There's been a total of 3 in Cook County, 2 in Chicago, and 1 somewhere else in the county. You can see it's mostly in the northeastern part of the state, and there's up through the middle of July, we've had a total of 16 cases. So we'll kind of keep an eye on that and see where it goes, but I was interested to learn that the rabies incident of rabies in bats is now being estimated at 5% of the wild population, as opposed to the lower figures that I was used to citing. So got to make a mental note of that. So as I was kind of brushing up on bat laws and rehabilitation laws and things like that, I was on the Illinois Vet Med website. This is down at U of I. They have a wonderful wildlife medical clinic down in Urbana. And what caught my eye was as I was looking at the homepage, you know, they've got all the usual tabs, the home button, about us, their outreach, they've got a critter cam of some of their patients. Well, look what's down on the bottom. Out in the middle, it says owl pellets. I thought, well, this has got to be interesting. I've got to click on this. So I did. And it turns out this kind of makes sense when you think about it. It's a nice little fundraiser they have going on there. They do have a lot of captive or owls that are undergoing rehabilitation, and you can buy them. I know some of you have asked me for sources of owl pellets, and I said, you know, occasionally Science and Surplus over in Geneva will carry them. We've always ordered them online from a company out in California that harvests them from a population of captive barn owls. But turns out Illinois Vet Med is collecting them, although there is a little note on the website, you can't order them right this minute because there's still, at least according to the website, they're not collecting them due to COVID. It might be worth a call if you're really in the market for them though, because you know, a lot of the COVID restrictions have been eased. I know owl pellet COVID restrictions probably weren't tops on the list for public health officials, but it might be worth checking them out. You can just look up the web addresses at the top of this screen snip here, vetmed.illinois.edu, and you can look up the owl pellets from there. So just kind of fun if you're in the market. They be supporting a great group down there at the College of Veterinary Medicine at Urbana-Champaign. So I was just tickled a couple of weeks ago to see this little structure on some fennel that I have growing in my front yard. Now, when you first look at it, you think, oh, it's a messy spider web. And that's exactly what the spider wants us to think. This is a very tiny little spider that we have in this area. It's called the Trashline Orbweaver. And there's actually a few different species, and there's all kinds of technical spider parts that I couldn't see and had trouble deciphering, but Cyclosa is the genus. And I took this picture probably, oh, I don't know, 2.5 weeks ago or so. It was around the 4th of July. And it was kind of a, oh, yay, I have a history with this spider. We'll get to that in a second. But the day or two after I took this photo, I was over at Delnor Woods. And what did I see? If we look closely at, this is the sculpture that's been installed by the front pond at Delnor Woods Park over on Route 25. What caught my eye is this line of trash in a spider web. There is a Trashline Orbweaver over, provided no one's messed with it, over on the sculpture at Delnor Woods Park. And we can zoom in here. And if we look really closely, we can see, it's a little pixelated, but these spiders position themselves right in the center of a web. And it's an intricate orb web. It's usually, maybe the size of a CD, compact disc, or maybe a 45 vinyl record, if you know what those are. And the spider, though, what it does is every time it molts as it's growing and it casts its skin, it weaves that shed skin into the center line of the web. Anytime it catches an insect, it feeds on the insect and it weaves that leftover exoskeleton from that insect into the web as well. So over time, you get this trashy line. I like to call them the trash spiders because it just kind of makes me laugh. It is a wonderful method of camouflage for them. Now, when I first learned about these spiders, it was actually 2 years ago in 2019, I noticed this web. This was by my front door. And truth be told, I was gonna knock it down because you know, when a spider web isn't being used anymore, it kind of gets messy looking. It's got a lot of insect parts building up in it. Sometimes it's detrimental to local insects that if there's no spider left to maintain the web, bugs are getting caught for no reason. So I do knock down the old messy webs, and I was about to do that with this one when I realized just how incredibly straight and orderly all these insect parts were arranged. So I looked closer at it, and again, right there in the middle sits this spider. Cyclosa spiders, they have this weird little knob coming off of the end of their abdomen. That's another species, genus trait that they have. And what they rely on is the trash sort of overwhelming their own appearances so that they really blend in. Most spiders, spider predators, say birds or other insects, other spiders even, they don't want to be just, poking through a lot of trash. So they tend to leave these spiders alone. Keep your eyes open for them. You might have some at your house. I don't know why the spider at Delnor Woods chose that particular sculpture. I don't believe we have any lights on it. If we do, that would explain it. And I have a small light outside of my front window that is on till about 10 o'clock and does draw some insects. So this particular location made sense. There might be a little bit of light bleed out to to where my fennel's growing, which would explain my 2021 trash spider. But anyway, they're super cool. This way that they weave their trash into their home, I think is just really fascinating and really effective. Keep your eye open for trash spiders. So what do we have here? This was a photo taken by local photographer Chuck, and he sent it to me as an example of a frog that's laying eggs. Well, a couple things jumped out at me when I looked at this picture. One, look above the frog. There's this perfect little exoskeleton, a cast skin from a dragonfly that had matured in the water and climbed out and shed its skin, maybe flew away after that. So that was one cool thing. And then the other thing is I'm looking at this pudgy frog in a most unusual position. I thought, that is really bizarre because that's a boy frog. So rather than a frog laying eggs, I believe we have a frog that's fertilizing eggs. I did send it to Allison Sacerdote-Villat, who coordinates our local frog monitoring program throughout the Chicago region. And I thought, maybe I missed something in frog class. Are there female green frogs, which by the way, that's what this is, a green frog. Are there any females that would have these big ears? This is what we're looking at to determine the sex. The big circle behind the eye in males of the green frog and bullfrog, that circle is bigger than the eye. In females, it's smaller. It's about the size of the eye, not nearly as noticeable as it is in the male. So Allison looked at it and she goes, nope, yeah, that's male. She said the female might be somewhere down in the weeds producing those eggs, but she couldn't say for certain. We do know that she was there fairly recently because those eggs are useless without being fertilized. So anyway, kind of an interesting take on our local pond life. This photo, I believe, was taken about maybe even 3 weeks ago at this point. So this sort of reproductive activity is over for the most part. We can start looking for the results of that, which will be the little green frog tadpoles. Little is in quotes because they can take up to a year to transform. So they will get pretty large, like our bullfrogs. Our bullfrogs need a long time too, which is why both of these species need to breed in permanent water. I believe Chuck said he took this photo down at Lippo Park in, was it Batavia, North Aurora? But there are ponds down there that, unless we're in an extreme drought, the springs that feed them keep them full of water year round. So with that, let's take a look at our state bird, the northern cardinal. Now, I think every one of us, even if you're new to birding, you can probably identify a cardinal. I know when I was learning birds, it was one of the first 2 or 3 that I learned about. It is the state bird of Illinois and many other states. It's very striking, especially the male with the contrast, the black mask against those bright red feathers. Here he's parked next to his female. As is the case with a lot of bird species, females have less coloration. The juvenile or immature birds follow that rule. It behooves them to have less color, so they'll blend in better. Better camouflage means there might be less chance of getting eaten. Now, before we go on to our Cardinal ID tip, I need to warn you that this next picture isn't pretty. I wished I had better circumstances to take it under, but I was actually walking into a meeting a couple of weeks ago, looked down on the ground, and what did I see but a cardinal. It was a window kill victim. This was, the bird was lying about 3 feet or so from a very large plate glass window. And the person I was walking with said, oh, a female cardinal got hit. And I said, oh, I think it might be a female, but it's definitely an immature northern cardinal. And we know that by looking, we know that by looking at its bill. Mom and dad up here on the left, as the cardinals mature, their bill turns a bright kind of orangish color. The immature bill is dark. So it's a quick thing that you can check. Hopefully the cardinals that you check aren't going to be lying on the ground in a rigor mortis type of pose. Hopefully you'll be seeing them in the trees. They are around. Our cardinals have been doing pretty well. I know the cardinals in my yard, I believe, raised 2 families this year, working on their second ones now. The dad's been singing quite a bit lately, but dad and mom, actually, I always forget cardinals are one of the species where both the males and the females sing. So anyway, check the bill. When we're in the breeding season like this, especially later in summer as we're getting to be, the cardinal, the immature cardinals look similar to the females, but they have a dark bill. So remember last week we had lizard love. Well, this week we have lizard love update. Laura McKenzie, this is your little guy. This was the photo you shared. This was the tiny little lizard that appeared in Laura's living room. Scurried under the sofa, caused a little bit of consternation, but then ended up coming over to live with me. So I just wanted to give you a little update. Actually, 2 updates. The first one is that little lizard is doing just fine. The fruit flies, the flightless fruit flies that I purchased are multiplying exponentially now. So the little guy's got plenty to eat. His tummy is nice and round. I've been misting him in the morning so he can wake up and have a little drink, have a little snack, sit in the sunshine. We're through almost through, well, a week and a half. I was gonna say week 2. This is the lizard that I've struck out twice before trying to raise. This is the lizard that comes from tropical plants that have been brought up from Florida. That's where the other part of our update comes in. So I got a text last Thursday from my friend Melinda who said, check this out. my friend just drove back from Florida and she thinks she has a hitchhiker. You know what it is. It's a little lizard. Can you see it down there? In fact, let's zoom in a little bit. There it is down on the rocks. I'm guessing this is in front of her house. Wasn't quite sure on exactly where this was, but sure enough, here's another brown anole from Cuba appearing in Illinois. Well, I was gonna go through the whole thing about, did your friend, bring any plants back with her? I was sort of mulling over how this lizard might have hitchhiked this way to Illinois when I got another text. This one was a few hours later. Melinda added, get this, my friend's mom saw the lizard while watering plants at her house before she even came home from Florida. It's not a hitchhiker. Double scream face. So I don't know. In fact, I don't know if they were able to catch this lizard at all. I wasn't able to ask if they purchased any tropical plants that may have been grown in Florida where this species has been introduced. But if you hadn't tuned in last week, I'll just give you a quick synopsis. These brown anoles that were introduced into Florida, the females lay their eggs 1 or 2 at a time, and they love to go into these nurseries, these large outdoor growing areas in Florida, and they deposit their eggs in the potting soil of plants that are then shipped all over the country. So again, I don't know exactly, because now it's not Melinda and it's not Melinda's friend, it's Melinda's friend's mom. So I don't know exactly the story on whether they had bought some tropical plants and put them out in the yard. I also don't know whether they were able to catch the lizard because they move really fast. But if there's any more updates on that, I will be sure and let you know. Yeah. We don't need to go through all of those because we want to give another update. The update on those redheads, not the clown redheads, but rather the red-headed woodpeckers. Last week, we talked about an email that I'd received from a retired professor who recalled reading about red-headed woodpeckers being very susceptible to being run over, hit by cars because they were foraging near roads in the middle of the 20th century. That was a prime cause of mortality for those red-headed woodpeckers. Now, the professor said that he'd seen reference to that in a textbook from the 1970s, but he wasn't ever able to find the source that the textbook cited. He didn't know where that data came from. Well, let's hear it for Bob and Kathy. They pulled out this. This is one of a series of Illinois Natural History Survey publications from the 1970s, the Picaday, which are the woodpeckers. And sure enough, on page 35, that says that Eifrig in 1937 and 1938 stated that redhead numbers were declining because of the automobile. He observed that redheads are sometimes hit by cars as the birds picked up insects from the road. Redheads do appear to show a special susceptibility to this type of mortality. And there's a number of sources from 1926, 1934, 35, 1927, 1929, 1938. So lots of sources to back up that assertion. So I wonder if that is something that continues today, or they're certainly under, this book also talks about how starlings have come in and taken over the cavities that they would normally be nesting, that the woodpeckers would normally be nesting in. It talks about how when Dutch elm disease created a lot of dead trees, that kind of helped to increase the population because of the trees that were dying were allowing the woodpeckers to have more dead trees, which is what they prefer to nest in. It's a really, really interesting book. And as luck would have it, you can access it online. The Natural History Survey has all of these guides that were written by Richard Graber and Jean Graber. in the 1970s and 1980s. You don't have to pay anything. They are all available as PDFs. Darn it. And you can go to their website, guides.library.illinois.edu /ornithology/Illinois birds. So you can see besides woodpeckers, there's lots of other ones you can learn about. The corvids, and I believe the mimidy are in there, the catbird is there, and the thrasher. There's lots and lots of different families that you can download these wonderful publications and learn more about if you're so interested. So let's go on to this. I think I've used this one before. Let's make some angry moth noises because I had a little bit of moth frustration. This was last week. Got an email. It said, hi, Pam. I've got a couple of questions for you. There's a plant that likes to grow up in my flower bed. I thought it was kind of pretty, so I let it go, but now I'm wondering what it is. It has self-seeded over the last couple of years. And then this person also asked, under a different email, they were wondering how, what type of moth, this curious moth that they'd found, wondering what it was. Let's take a look. Now, the irony of this is that the mystery plant actually turned out to be moth mullein, Verbascum blattaria. It's a non-native species. It's kind of pretty. It is related to the other mulleins that have the very furry basal leaves and have the tall flower stalk. The flowers on the common mullein grow much closer together, but this was kind of a nice feature. And it doesn't seem to be invasive. Illinois Wildflowers says that it kind of plays nicely with others. It's not a huge problem in our landscape, and it's a very attractive plant to pollinators. So, but that's kind of an aside because the angry moth noises that I made actually concerned this little guy right here. Now, I didn't know what it was, and so I had to try and figure it out. But when I looked at it, I thought, boy, you know what? I have seen that posture before. In fact, I saw this posture just a month ago. I don't know if you can see, you can kind of tell in these two pictures. This was sent to me by a reader out in Sugar Grove, and she had observed this moth on her screen. Look at how the abdomen twists up on this moth, and look at how the abdomen twists up on that moth. Right? Well, but then when I put them side by side, they're totally different. So Smerinthus was the moth. I wasn't 100% sure on the June moth what it was. There's a one-eyed sphinx. There's a two-spotted sphinx. Pretty sure, though, that we were looking at some sort of sphinx moth in June. So this July moth would make total sense to be yet another type of sphinx moth. Well, let me tell you, we have a lot of different sphinx moths in Illinois. I thought I was onto something when I learned about the walnut sphinx. It too turns its abdomen up, and it's kind of similar. This, in fact, Amorpha is the genus name. There's only one species in the genus, and Amorpha means lots of different shapes. This moth is highly variable in both the shape of the wings and the markings on it. But I couldn't find anything that matched the mystery moth because what was throwing me was the legs. Look at the legs on this thing. It's either been, hitting the gym every day, or it's got the hairiest legs in moth land. I could not find anything that matched up with those legs. So after more time than I'm going to admit spent trying to sort through the identification of this moth, I finally just resorted to just generic terms in the search engines. Gray moth, upturned abdomen, gray moth, large legs. I did find one string of conversation. I think it was on Reddit, where they had the right moth, but they didn't have a name for it. Somebody said, oh, I think that's an emperor moth. Well, it's not an emperor moth. There was, I believe it was Project Noah. There was another picture of this mystery moth, and they had identified it as this walnut sphinx. But again, it doesn't match up. The legs are not right, and there were just too many differences. So after, again, an unmentionable amount of time and a lot of angry moth noises, I finally figured out that this is the spotted Pellets. It's this moth right here, and that name right there. And it's one of the things about my job that I just love, when I finally am able to figure something out that's been a puzzle. And I didn't use iNaturalist. I didn't, to me, I'm starting to realize now. I remember back when I was in high school and I struggled with math and I wanted to use a calculator, and gosh, my teacher's like, no, you need to work it out by hand. You need to learn to use a slide rule. You need to learn the old way of doing things. I still feel like, by just going to iNaturalist or Seek or those different apps, you can get an answer. And sometimes you need an answer quickly. So there's nothing wrong with doing it then, but to really learn to study an animal and to see its features and to learn how it's related to other creatures, to maybe know the family that it comes from. There's nothing like doing things the old way with a little cheating help from the search engines. Anyway, so I looked this bug up, this insect up on Bug Guide. Turns out it's fairly common. It's nothing unusual. It's found over a wide range. But as I was reading down the page of Bug Guide, this jumped out at me. It's an odd looking species and it's easily mistaken for a sphinx moth. So lesson learned. What looks like a sphinx isn't always a sphinx. Now, some of you pointed out to me that we are getting towards the end of this registration session, the sessions that have been loaded up onto our registration platform, the Peak platform. Well, Erica, our marketing manager, went in today and fixed that. If you go to register for future, and I hope you will register for future episodes of the Good Natured Hour, go to the Park District's homepage, which is stcparks.org. If you scroll down to e-activities, click on that and you'll find adult activities. If you click on that, I think there's one more screen that takes you to our another Good Natured page. But I tell you, if you just keep clicking, you will make your way to the Peak registration system, and you'll be able to, if you're so inclined, add more dates. I think she loaded them up through the end of the year, with the exception of Tuesday, August 17th. One more reminder, if you are in the area and you're so inclined to sign up for the Learn from the Experts program on singing insects with local expert Carl Strang. That's going to be really fun. It's also on a Tuesday night, so there will be no Good Natured on Tuesday, August 17th. But all the other dates, all the way through the end of December, are loaded in. So hope to see you at future weeks of our Zoomcast here. Next week, we're going to take a look at a really cool insect that I came upon when I was actually looking for something else. We're going to learn a little bit about mantid flies, also sometimes referred to as mantis flies. I didn't get a chance to fully research our Canada goose behavior, so I'm kicking that one off till next week. Maybe we'll get to it then. Turned out there was a little bit more to the story than I was anticipating. Got some more fun spiders that are being cited. Reader emails are a constant and a given. And who knows what else is going to happen over the next week. So with that, I much appreciate your sticking in for this long of a time. I know it's getting close to bedtime. I'm going to stop my screen share and I'm going to turn it over to you guys. We've got, So Chris had seen a hummingbird moth up at James Pate Phillip. Yeah, you know, it's moth season, it's spider season, all these wonderful things. I got a long email. It was so long that I couldn't even cut it down to paraphrase it in a timely manner, but it was from a woman who lives out in the Quad Cities. And she is very concerned about the lack of insects on her property. She's lived there since the 1970s and has always looked forward to the bees and the butterflies and the moths and the hummingbirds. And she actually has notes that she's kept over time and has been able to document the decrease in numbers over the last going on 50 years. Yes, National Moth Week. We can make some happy moth noises because of that. National Moth Week, I believe there's even an international component to it. Lots of nighttime events coming up throughout the area celebrating these wonderful species. With that, does anybody else have any questions? Martha? Look for Trashline Orbweavers at your house. I know they're out there. Just have to look for it. Don't knock the web down until you're sure that nobody's home. Anybody have any questions, comments for the group? If not, thanks so much for your time tonight, and I will see you all next week. Hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday and the rest of your week. And see you soon. Take care.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you, Pam.
Sure.
Thanks, Pam.
Thanks, Pam. Good night, everybody. Good one.